up. So we just heard from the Democrat in the governor's race. Now to the candidate who entered the campaign with some good name recognition. Fought through the Republican field to get his party's nomination. Chris Sununu, best of luck to you moving forward. I've been saying that. It's not over just yet. All right, so let's talk about this race. Right now, the polls indicate that Van Ostrand's a front runner. Are you buying it?
Do you want me to comment on the WMUR poll? Really?
I mean, just what's your feeling out there? I mean, there's a lot of undecided voters.
We don't look at polls that closely. The few that we do have, we feel very confident, very comfortable with where we are. Our message is resonating. There's no doubt about it. The people definitely want a governor that has experience, that's going to bring whether it's my experience as an engineer, as a real business leader, as someone who has to manage jobs and employees day to day. That's the frontline experience, the stakeholder experience people want in the corner office, and we feel very good about our numbers.
You talk about that in a new ad where you say that you created hundreds of jobs at Waterville Valley.
Absolutely.
Is that accurate?
Of course. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, there's a report out by Public Radio that would seem to indicate that the jobs decreased.
I mean, last year I think we've had somewhere in the neighborhood of over 800 jobs over the past few years. When you look at the company we bought Waterville from, we've increased those numbers drastically. We've also started restaurants that we sold. We started a fun park and a tubing area that we sold. We just invested $2.5 million into expanding the resort. We just did a partnership program with Workforce Housing. We have nonprofits. So there's a lot of other aspects there. Again, this is just another great example of the Democrats, my opponent, doing anything he can to not talk about issues, to not talk about the vision of the state, to not talk about his lack of experience. I mean, they've hit my family, they've hit my business. They're doing, again, whatever they can to try to spur up some negative emotion there. But at the end of the day, the people of New Hampshire are smarter than that. The people of New Hampshire want real experience, and they want someone who's not afraid to talk about the issues.
Well, let's talk about Dartmouth-Hitchcock. A few minutes ago, the issue over the contract, which you said needs to be rebid, is playing politics with people's health care.
Politics.
That's the accusation.
Let's look at the facts. The fact that it looks like now that this contract was railroaded to one group when there were other groups that could have partaken in it. We have found out there have been so many red flags, right? That how the employees were hired was a drastic red flag, and months ago I called for it to be rebid. Then when the contract finally goes through, 2 days later we find out they're going to lay off hundreds of employees, and then we find out more financial information, and then some of the senior folks there resign. That's not politics. Those are facts. Those are red flags. And when you're talking about mental health for some of our most sensitive constituencies, there's nothing political there. We demand results, and we demand action. We demand accountability. This has been mismanaged from the beginning by Governor Hassan, her administration. Colin was part of that, and they're sitting on their hands. They want to just simply say, well, we'll get reports and monitor how it's going. Absolutely not. Leadership is about getting results. Leadership is about ensuring the best possible services for the people.
Sure. But without Dartmouth-Hitchcock agreeing to tear up the contract, there's really no recourse. So the best thing you can do is provide the most oversight possible. Or is there another option?
Well, look, again, I call on the governor, the attorney general, the commissioner to find a way to push back, to recall the contract, because technically the contract hasn't been started yet. It doesn't start till November 1st. My idea was extend the existing contract, give us some time, again, change the RFP to entice more businesses to come in. I mean, we've made the process so onerous, and now it's a question about why it was made that way, that really only one group bid on it. There's lots of groups out there that could have bid on this contract, but we made the contract, the request for proposal, in such a way that it was railroaded to one group. That's not fair, and it's not always going to get you the best results for the citizens.
Well, we'll see what happens with that. Let's talk about Medicaid expansion. The opponent accuses you of wanting to get rid of it entirely, but now just saying,
look, I've always said I'm open to expanding, to keep going forward with Medicaid expansion in chunks. My opponent wants to make Obamacare permanent. You know what happens when you make a giant Washington program permanent? You lose all control over cost, over programming, over what's important to your state, over, I mean, when you're dealing, for example, with the substance abuse crisis. Expanded Medicaid has provided a lot of great services to folks to deal with substance abuse. That's a really positive thing. Other states don't necessarily have that issue like we have here. Other states don't have the issue of an aging population like we do. My point is that we have to design a system that meets our needs. Once you make something permanent, you've lost all control over it. New Hampshire people have to have the ability to do it New Hampshire's way. That's how we're going to get the best results for the citizens. Not just, again, accepting all these giant government programs that require giant tax dollars and giant subsidies. That's not leadership. That's deferring, and we've had too much of that. I'm going to put real leadership with again, real experience behind it to make sure we're getting the best possible results.
Pointing to our poll again, the majority of New Hampshire folks seem to think that the state's in the right direction. The economy's not doing as bad as some Republicans might have you believe, is the accusation. Our unemployment is pretty low. I mean, 2.9. Where this
look, having low unemployment is fine, but that's not how you judge the metric of when was the last time we brought a major business in here? When was the last time we drove major business into the state? We're not, because we have an overburdensome regulatory environment. We have some of the highest healthcare costs in the country. We have energy costs that are out of control and putting elderly and low-income folks, those on fixed incomes, with no financial flexibility in their lives. Look, I've never said the sky is falling here in New Hampshire. But we have not had real leadership in the corner office with real experience in the business sector. I was 10 years as an environmental engineer cleaning up hazardous waste sites. I've been running Waterville Valley, hundreds of employees. The responsibility of making sure they have the best health care, the responsibility of making sure you have cash flow, not just next month, but next year, long-term viability. These are the things I go to sleep with, try to go to sleep with sometimes, every single night. The anxieties and the pressures of having that responsibility, and getting the best results for it. And I'm incredibly proud of what we did at Waterville Valley. The fact that we're the only resort on the East Coast expanding this year. 10 new trails, a new lift. We just bought new workforce housing. We're the only group doing that. So the Democrats can do anything they want in terms of trying to deflect from issues and not talk about what's important to the state. We're here to talk about issues. I wish my opponent would. I was at a debate last night. He didn't even show up. I sat at a podium, sat at a debate with an empty podium next to me. They don't want to talk about issues. They don't want to show up to the table. They're hoping anything they can just to get in on Hillary's coattails. But let me tell you, in a couple of weeks, we feel very comfortable where we are, and I think we're going to turn the state around.
You talk about sleeping at night. I would bet that there's a lot of Republican candidates who are lying awake, lamenting the fact that they are running in a year in which Donald Trump is the nominee of the party at the top of the ticket. I mean, you're asked about this all the time. Is he now a liability as far as...
Look, if you want to look at poll numbers, we don't look at them, but even the MUR poll numbers say we poll well ahead of Donald Trump. So, you know, what he does in his election, that's kind of his business. If there's any message that people should take home about our campaign, I don't trust Washington. I don't trust anything that comes out of that place. I really don't. And I don't think many people do, which is all the more reason you need to have a strong governor in your state, a strong governor that's going to do it the New Hampshire way, that's going to hold some fiscal responsibility, that's going to drive business in here, has experience doing that, creating jobs, dropping healthcare costs, doing the things that can really impact people's lives, individual responsibility, more local control of schools, letting parents finally have the decision of what's happening in their kids' classrooms. That's the New Hampshire way of doing things, and that's exactly what I'm going to bring.
Well, somebody's going to have to, post-election day, reach out and try to bridge the gap that's been formed in this cycle. It's been divisive. A lot of people are still angry. What do you do? How do you do it?
Look, I take great pride in the fact I don't burn bridges. I don't believe in it. I think it'd be very hard-pressed to find anyone in Concord, Republican or Democrat, that I don't really get along with. So I have a record of pushing back against my own party when I have to. I have a record of reaching across the aisle. I have a record of working very strongly with the opposing party. My opponent can't say that. He really can't. So look at our records, look at the success that we've had in terms of bridging that gap and making sure that we keep people at the table, good ideas coming forward. I'm not always the smartest guy in the room, but I'm very good at bringing the best and brightest to the table without any care about political background, putting those ideas on the table and driving forward with action. And that's what we haven't had. Real action in this state to back up the words in a campaign.
We have about a minute to go. Undecideds, according to our poll, more undecideds than there are people who have made up their minds. How do you make the case to them over the course of the next 16 days?
Well, you're always going to have a large proportion of undecideds. We're in New Hampshire, right? We look at the candidate. We want to look people in the eye and understand what they're about. That's why I've taken a year traveling the state. I was up in Pittsburgh and Colebrook just last week, traveling the state, listening to what people, what their concerns are. And that's what a governor's supposed to do. Listen to the people and carry those concerns to Concord. Not just stick with the political talking points on a piece of paper, drive home negative advertising, all that negativity. We've had enough of that, right? And again, the Democrats can take their shots at my family. As you know, we've discussed, they even put a picture of my mom in an attack ad. I mean, that is just beneath the dignity of New Hampshire. New Hampshire's about service. It's not a politics is not a, well, politics is a career for my opponent, but it's about public service, it's about trust. And again, we've taken the time to do it, and we're going to be very successful in a couple weeks.
Best of luck to you moving forward.
Appreciate it.